Hello and welcome to Daily Spark TD. Today we are talking about, are we becoming a stressed and depressed culture? I know, great question. That's what I'm asking of my guest today, Barbara Mezera. Let me tell you a little bit more about Barbara. She was born in southwestern Wisconsin and grew up on a farm. She worked over 20 years in a variety of hospitals and clinics as a clinical laboratory scientist. When computers took over the laboratory, she changed careers, earning her master's degree in special education. For the past 15 years, she has been teaching special needs students in rural Wisconsin. She's the author of From Despair to Hope and Healing: One Woman's Journey in Poem. Thank you so much, Barbara, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I love the topic that we're going to talk about today, and I think that our listening audience, our viewing audience, is going to enjoy as well. Are we stressed? Are we becoming depressed? Are we even becoming kind of anxious with everything that's going on in the world? So my first question to you is, how bad is it really?
Well, according to some of the statistics I've read, they say that 1 in 5 people have a mental illness, whether it's depression, anxiety, or some of the more significant ones. So it is becoming a big issue, and the schools are starting to recognize that and are trying to get more help and more training for the staff to help the students do it, because people that have this disease, 50% are diagnosed by the time they're 14, and 75% are diagnosed by the time they're 24. So the 14 to 25, 26-year-old group is the group that has the most disability.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that age range, because I think for so many people, we just kind of write our teens off and say, oh, they misbehave or they're horrible to deal with, that type of conversation, where they actually may be struggling with something and they really need that person to step in and assist. So thank you so much for mentioning that. Now, when we talk about people that are affected, and thank you for mentioning teens, is there a look to someone dealing with stress, anxiety, or depression? Or is it the average Jack and Jane?
There is a look to it. If you got anxiety, you might be talking too fast. You might be asking the same question all the time because you need that reassurance. If it's the other side and it's the depression, you may be shut down. You're not motivated to do your schoolwork. You're not motivated to even maybe go out with your friends if it's significant enough depression, and you just don't care. And that's an attitude that a lot of times isn't picked up on. Oh, they just don't care about anything. Well, maybe they don't care because they can't care. And irritability is another common symptom for a teenager. So the kid that's always in your face, he may be dealing with a mental health issue that's not diagnosed, that a lot of people don't recognize.
Is one thing that the adults that are in the lives of our teens, do you think that we could, and just your opinion, do you think that we could do a better job at listening to our teens? Not just hearing what they have to say, but kind of listen to their tone and how they're presenting what they say.
I think that's key, because if you really sit down and listen to some of these kids, you're like, wow, you know, they had a horrible morning, or maybe their family life isn't real great. And for some kids, they just need somebody that they can trust to listen to them. And that's really all they need. They don't need to be on medication. They don't maybe even need counseling if they got somebody that will listen to them and say simply, I hear you. Yeah, that's horrible, or that's a bad situation. You know, what can we do to help you work through it? And just spend your time listening.
Absolutely. And, you know, there are so many teachers that I know, they are that person, that they really and truly do care about their students, but they just have so many students that it's hard to keep up with everyone. But I think that will definitely help. Flip side of the coin, so to speak, stress. I think everyone is familiar with that term. There may be someone saying, well, I'm not anxious or I'm not depressed, but stressed, yeah, you guys are onto something there. Are we getting better as a society with dealing with our stress? Or are we just as stressed today as we were 5, 10 years ago?
I think we might be more stressed, but I also think it's becoming more of a symptom that people are listening to. You're finding schools that have a quiet room. A kid that's stressed and starting to act out, he can go down to that room, spend 5 or 10 minutes there. It's got soothing music, low lights. Maybe there's a puzzle or something, drawing material, so he can spend some time there just trying to self-regulate himself a little bit more and learn how to self-regulate himself so he can go back to the classroom and learn. Another thing some schools are doing is they're putting walking paths through their hallways where the kid jumps so many places and then he marches, there's directions, tells them what to do.
Oh, yes,
and
yes.
There's, so now he gets to actively be involved, and they're finding out that this not having recess isn't good for these kids.
Yeah.
Because they do need to move, and if they can move, they can come back and learn a whole lot better.
It's really funny that we know that even as an adult, we need a break. We look forward to lunch, not just because it's time to eat, but so that we can take a moment to step away, to kind of refresh ourselves for a moment and then get back to our task. So yeah, recess is important. To everyone, not just to kids, but for adults as well.
It is. I teach at the high school, and some of my kids, I've had them do push-ups, I've had them do sit-ups, because they just need to move. And some kids, I even let out, if I can trust them, let them go out and run around the school building 3 times and come back in. And those are some strategies I've used with the kids I've worked with.
That can work wonders. I love that idea. Well, it is time of taking a bit of a recess. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for our Daily Spark TV. Barbara, question. We're talking about teens, but we also know that adults suffer from anxiety, depression, and stress. When we're looking at our teens and trying to interact with them as best as we can to let them know that we're a safe place for them to have conversation, to go to have a bit of a reprieve. Do teens deal with their parents dealing with stress or depression or anxiety? Does that look different than an adult dealing with another adult?
Yeah, because the adult is a more pure relationship. It's adult-to-adult. The teens sometimes they become the parent and have the more stable emotional situation. And so now they're in an adult role that maybe they're not quite prepared for because they are only 14 or 16. And so they're trying to support a parent that has significant issues, not realizing that the parent's issues are going to affect them too, because they're the people that are around the most, and we pick up on people's emotions and respond to them in various ways depending on our temperament and our emotional stability and ability.
And that's something that, a version of that is what we deal with in my practice as well, with the learned behaviors, with how you pick up on what your parents do and you process that according to your ability to process that. You're definitely onto something there. Now, on the other side, dealing with adults, do men and women have a different way of dealing with what's going on?
Well, the cliche is boys and men act out, women and girls act in, and there is some truth to that, which is why a lot of times in special education you see a lot more boys because they got caught acting out, and the girl that's acting in, who maybe even has more depression than anybody else in the room, is not picked up on because they're quiet, they don't say much, they're functioning at an acceptable level, and they just kind of get ignored because they're not letting anybody know that, gee, I'm feeling really sad, I don't want to live. And it can be pretty bad before a girl who acts in gets picked up on, whereas the boy that's angry and irritable and is in anybody's face, he's going to get picked up on right away.
Right. Wow. I think the light is going off for someone going, wow, I never thought of it like that. That is so true. Now, have you found in your research that the socioeconomic level of when we're looking at students across our nation, does that have an effect as well? That certain school districts may be affected in a different way, or certain states are adversely affected in certain ways?
I guess where I see the difference is not the number of kids that have the issues, because that's kind of pretty stable really, but the treatment. In the lower socioeconomic places, there's less support, there's less social workers, there's less places for these parents and students to get the help they need.
Right.
And that, to me, is the difference. I was down in the Madison area, and there was all kinds of resources up down there when I was dealing with my depression. And now I'm up in rural Wisconsin, and for my kids to get help, sometimes they have to go 150, 200 miles from home to get the help they need.
And that is going to make a huge difference. Even if you're an adult, 100 miles away from home is quite a journey. When you have a life to live, you have work and family and everything else that you have to do. Wow, that is amazing. Now, when we look at the age of the person that we want to help or assist in any way, we've talked about teens, we've talked about adults, but does it have an effect on our seniors as well?
I'm not real familiar with the senior thing. I'm sure it does. Isolation, I know, can be a real issue, which if you're depressed, you don't want to be around people, so now you're not only being naturally isolated because maybe your mobility is not so well, but now you're isolating yourself even more, and that can affect your health issues and any other type of issues you have there. For the older adults, it's really important that they stay connected socially, whether it's family, friends, whatever. You know, if you're able, get involved in your community. Volunteer. There isn't a school in the nation that would love to have a grandma reader or a grandpa reader come in. You know, and just that one-on-one interaction with this little kid may keep him from becoming depressed or anxious, because he's got somebody that's in his corner at least once a week. Even if it's just an hour once a week, it can make a huge difference for these kids.
It really can. And you know, as you were saying that, it made me think about if the senior isn't dealing with it, but perhaps the teen is, perhaps that grandmother, that grandfather, or you know, that play mom or play dad, or however you want to go there, that might be the perfect person that you talk to. Perhaps you can't get 100 miles away to the professional, which we would want for you, of course, to go that route, but perhaps grandmother is only 20 miles away, and you may be able to spend some time with her or with him and give great advice. That is a wonderful way. So many times I think within our culture, we're so used to everything being so fast and being so quick, and we forget that there is a beauty in sometimes slowing down and being able to process. So what a great way to perhaps slow down and make cookies with grandma, or go fishing with grandpa, and just have some of that heart to heart and let some of that stuff out. So wow, thank you for reminding everyone of that. I love it. Now, one last question for you before we go to break, and you kind of touched on it, and that is dealing with depression from a personal perspective. When did you realize that this was a little bit more than just the blues?
I was probably close to 30 when I really was able to accept the fact that it wasn't just the fact that I'm quiet and shy and reserved, because that's my temperament, that's who I am. But my silence was a whole lot more of depression than that. And it has a different flavor, but it took a long time to realize that the people that were concerned about me had a reason to be concerned. They just didn't want me to change who I was. They wanted me to more fully become who I am. And to at times let that sly humor out, let that dry humor out, and you know, interact with them at a better level than I was capable of when I was in the middle of my clinical depression.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, it is time for us to take a very short break, but when we get back, we will continue talking about, are we stressed? Are we depressed? What's going on in today's society. We'll be back right after this.
I'm Barbara Mezera. I'm a special ed high school teacher in Wisconsin. I wrote a book called From Despair to Hope and Healing, One Woman's Journey in Poem. It's poetry that came out of my journey through depression and the therapy that I did to reach hope and healing. It's a book that, from what people have said that have read it, it gives people hope through the dark times in life. And I guess that's the message that I want to get out there, that there is hope. Even when the depression is bad, there's always that little spark of hope that can get people through things. My book, From Despair to Hope and Healing, One Woman's Journey in Poem, can be purchased at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. I have a website, barbaramezerabooks.com, that you can go to connect with me.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining us for Daily Spark TV. So Barbara, we were talking about realizing that this is more than the blues and your process along this. So many times, various health practitioners will give us certain things that we should or shouldn't do, be it that you're going to see a dietitian or a nutritionist, psychologist, or a licensed social worker. Each person gives a little bit of a different advice. What was some of the best advice that your professional mental health team gave to you that you found to be the most effective?
Well, I was immediately, when I went to see a psychiatrist, I was immediately put on medication. And at that point, I was so depressed, I was just going to do whatever or nothing. But for me personally, without the medication, the talk therapy I needed to deal with some of the abuse issues, some of the other issues in my life, would have never been able to happen. Probably the best thing that has helped me in was the use of writing and journaling. And my therapist figured out pretty quickly that I'm easily hypnotized, and to be hypnotized, you need to cooperate. You can't just be hypnotized if you don't want to be. That's not going to happen. But it worked for me because it relaxed me enough to be able to talk. And then I would read my journal aloud to her, and that's a whole different thing than handing her the journal and saying, here,
Absolutely.
You read it. So then I had to process it that way too, and the writing was huge for me. That and exercise is huge for me.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned the journaling, because I know that that's something that I suggest that my clients do. And just freestyle. Just get the thought out of your head onto the paper. Don't edit yourself. Don't stop yourself just to get it out. And the beautiful part is when you go back and you read it 6 months from now, you can see where you were, where you are now, and it's a beautiful way to gauge your progress. Even if you don't think that you've progressed any, you can go back and go, oh wow, I can't believe I said that on 6 months ago. I'm so much better now. So that is awesome. I'm glad that you had that experience as well. Now, did you find that writing your book was freeing in any way? Did it help you deal with what was going on in your personal life?
The poems in my book were an integral part of my therapy. A lot of them came out of that. My therapist is the first person that saw most of them. And then as I started to share more when I was teaching, because they would have talent shows and they would ask me to read a poem or so, and then you had people coming up and saying, well, that's how I felt. That's the way I feel about that. It's nice to know I'm not alone. And I guess the point I really want to make with the book is, even in the darkness, there's a little bit of hope. And if you can just hang on to that little bit of hope, you can see the next day and the next day and make progress. And every time you have a good day or two, pretty soon you got 3 in a row.
Yeah.
And then you got a good week. And then you're thinking, well, maybe I can have a good month. And then you're making, maybe I can have a good year.
Do you think that people are almost overwhelming themselves because they try to look at too large of a time span, as opposed to saying, let's see if we can just make it to lunch, as opposed to, okay, I have to make it to summer, or I have to make it till Christmas? Do you think that if we took smaller portions of time and kind of just use that as our milepost, that would help us?
Yeah, because a lot of times when I was coming through the recovery process, I would get up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to have a good day till noon. And then a month or two later, let's see if I can have a good day all day. And once you start stacking the good days and don't focus so much on the bad days, you see a little more hope. And then you can move that forward little by little.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we want it all cured right now, and it doesn't happen that way. You know, I still go through times of depression, but I know they aren't going to last. So I can get through them. And I still take my medication, because when I tried to get off of it, 3 of my students said to me, why are you so crabby all the time? And these were students I didn't have any trouble with. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute.
Okay, they're
This
starting
is
to
on
notice.
me, not on them. What do I need to do to change this around? And I went back on the full dose and never heard it again.
And smooth sailing from that point forward. I love it. And you know, I love how our young people, their filter is, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, it's thin. You know, it's not a thick filter, it's really thin. And they say whatever comes to mind, but sometimes their truth is refreshing. It might be a little startling or even off-putting sometimes, but it is still truth, and I appreciate them for that. Now, with all that you have been able to share and discover and conquer, have you found that your faith has played a part in any of that?
The faith was huge, because without my faith, I'm not sure I'd even be here having this conversation. In the worst of it, my prayer was just help. That's all I could do. And obviously, I'm here discussing it. I'm sharing it in ways that a lot of people with depression can't do. Yeah. So hopefully I can bring them some hope. And without my faith, it wouldn't have happened. In fact, now instead of doing psychological counseling, I do spiritual direction, just to keep my faith moving forward and becoming deeper and deeper.
Now, for the person who says, this has really changed my outlook or my understanding of perhaps what a loved one or friend is going through. For the person who this is really resonating with them, what are some first steps for someone who says, I think it's time for me to step out and take a more professional look at what's going on? What should they do?
Find somebody you can trust, ask them, somebody that will listen to you, ask them, maybe they know somebody who's in counseling, maybe they know a counselor, a pastor of any kind. Sometimes you don't even have to go that way. If you got a real good friend and you can trust them and they're willing to listen, maybe for some people that's all you really need. Not everybody needs the medication. Not everybody needs years of psychological counseling, but sometimes we need 4 or 5 months of it, because we need somebody to listen to it and get us over that hump and onto something, a little better path. We pick up some skills and some different ways of dealing with life when we talk to the professionals. You can start with your doctor, your physician assistant. Maybe they know somebody. And just kind of network that way to find somebody that's a fit for you. And it's got to be a fit.
Absolutely.
Because if it doesn't fit, it's going nowhere.
And I don't think that people realize that interview process that you have with your medical team, be it that it is your general practitioner or your PA or your psychiatrist or psychologist, it really does have to be a fit. If not, it's not going to be the best that it could possibly be. Well, Barbara Mezera, thank you so much for being on Daily Spark TV today and sharing not only your journey, but also reminding us that it's okay to be on this journey as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for tuning in to Daily Spark TV. I hope that I have inspired, empowered, and enlightened you today. Until next time, everyone, be blessed in the Lord.